Two stories that had profound impacts on me in my childhood got sequel stories set in the same world with a whole new set of characters, but it was still in the shadow of the old characters' decisions. The older crew was aging and had made an impact on the world, while the new cast was taking up the mantle and dealing with the new issues that had arisen in the same world that we all knew and loved. These new sequel series were expanding the world building and the power sets in this world that we all had learned to love over the years. But they were both quite divisive in the fandom. Some people absolutely loved what they brought new to the stories, and some people did not. Now, I was so excited for both of these new stories in this world that I loved, and upon watching them, there was one that I loved. My brain was blown, and it was the best thing I had ever seen. But the other entrance was not. I kind of hate it, and that's a really strong word, but there it is. And in this video, I'm going to try to go through explaining why I felt so strongly positively about one and negatively about the other. My name is April, this is High Fantasy Writing, and welcome to the video. So I didn't really see the connection between these two different entrances in completely separate fictional worlds at first, but the more I started thinking about it, the more connections I saw. When I started to get even more into analyzing the themes, characterizations, and story structures and the things that I consumed, I began to see a lot of parallels between these two works of art that took place in well-known, well-loved worlds. But I really felt strongly about both of these stories, so I really wanted to examine why I loved one and really didn't love the other. Was I being inconsistent with my critiques? Did I somehow have a preconceived bias against one and not the other? Should I turn in my objective critic badge and just shut up forever because I'm a stupid woman who has no idea how to judge stories? Some in the comments might agree. If you can't tell by the title of this video and the thumbnail, I'm going to be talking about the Star Wars The Last Jedi, the second movie in the sequel trilogy of the Star Wars franchise, and The Legend of Korra Season 1. So here I am investigating, and I know you're wondering which one do I love and which one do I hate. If you can't tell by the shirt, I loved The Last Jedi. I loved it. So why did I love The Last Jedi, which so many fans of Star Wars thought destroyed the original characters from the OG trilogy? And why did I hate The Legend of Korra when so many people praised it and its expansion of the Avatar: The Last Airbender world? Well, this very long video is going to go into what I discovered rewatching these two pieces of media. Now, of course, I have to give the disclaimer and preface this by saying that all analysis and reviews of media are subject to bias and preference. There is no objectively good art or objectively bad art. It's just what you bring to the table when you're watching them, what you prefer to see in characters, stories, and themes, and what the goal of the story was. Well, what you think the goal of the story was. So if you loved The Legend of Korra, I am so happy for you. I'm not trying to take away your enjoyment of this series or Korra as a character at all. Maybe just listening to me explain the way I feel about things will help you see my side of things and make you think maybe a little differently about either The Last Jedi or Korra, and just see where I'm coming from, instead of feeling like it's an attack on you and maybe you need to attack me back. And maybe you can take that thought process and expand it to others who disagree with you about media and whether something was good or bad, and just taking a breath and hopefully making it a more nuanced and constructive discussion rather than two sides vitriolically attacking each other. When I first went into watching The Legend of Korra Season 1, I was so excited for getting back into the world of Avatar: The Last Airbender that I loved so much, but I was very cautious and I was mourning the loss of our original characters and setting. I loved the story of Zuko and Aang and Katara and Sokka and Toph so much, and they had been with me for such a long time that it was hard for me to go into a story where I knew they wouldn't be present. Regardless of that, I did want to see where Korra was going to go, because after all, it was the same group of creatives that had made The Last Airbender, so I thought, how could they go wrong? How could the people who brought the masterpiece that was The Last Airbender, how could they be anything but fantastic in this new story that they came back to tell? I was certain that given enough time and enough development of the characters, I would come to love Korra and the new Avatar gang just as much as I loved the Aang gang and the old series. Watching the first episode of Korra, I wasn't blown away, but it's a pilot after all. You can't judge an entire show or all the characters or themes or story from just the first episode. So I was more than willing to give it the entire season and see how everything played out. Because surely we would get more depth to Korra than what we were just seeing in this first episode. So I watched the entire first season, and while I was able to enjoy certain aspects of it, I realized that I was really having to just turn my brain off and enjoy the punchy fight scenes rather than really engaging with the characters or the themes. The more I sat back and thought about what the story was saying and the different story structures and characters, the more I saw how flat and one-dimensional it was and how it really didn't live up to my expectations. But then I talked to my friends and saw the online discourse, and so many people loved it. Like, they loved Korra as a character. They thought that the themes explored were so adult and grown up, and for an older audience who had grown up with The Last Airbender and now were going into more complex real-life issues that might affect them personally, rather than the traditional fantasy of imperialist dictatorship tyrant trying to take over the world that not everybody is going to have direct personal experience with. So what gives? Why did my friends and other people love The Legend of Korra so much and I didn't? Was I just holding on to my love for Avatar: The Last Airbender and refusing to give Korra a shot? Just saying, well, it wasn't the same as The Last Airbender, so I can't love it? Was that what was happening? The exact polar opposite thing happened when I went to see The Last Jedi. I genuinely can't explain to you the emotions I had in the theater watching it for the first time. I so wish I could rewatch Last Jedi for the very first time, because the theater I went to see in was in my old tiny town that I went to high school in. I traveled there to go see it with one of my high school friends, and it's not the greatest theater. I worked at that theater before. I know it's terrible. And like, the audio was a little off, the color grading on the screen was a little off. But despite all of that, I just, for the first time, felt like this is something new and amazing while still perfectly encapsulating everything I love about Star Wars. It expanded everything so much. It wasn't a retread of what we already knew. It was taking elements of that and exploring them deeper, dissecting them, and really taking a look at what they are, why they are, and where we can go in the future with this. And it was genuinely like The Last Jedi was specifically made for me. The character arcs hit deep in my core. The themes were things that I had been thinking about since I started watching Star Wars, way when I was a wee child. And all throughout the prequels, I was thinking about these things and wanting these aspects of the world to be explored, and finally The Last Jedi was exploring them. Now, when I watched The Last Jedi, I walked out of the theater thinking that was the best piece of Star Wars content I had ever seen in my life. I was changed as a person. I know that sounds dramatic, but that's why I love stories. That's why I'm a writer. That's why I make these writing videos about story structure and writing and what works and what doesn't for me. Because I think that there is intense power in stories, and I felt that The Last Jedi really changed the way I view things, changed the way I interacted with Star Wars as a whole, in a positive way. Then I started talking to other people and seeing online, and they, a loud section of people did not agree with my analysis of The Last Jedi. Now, I didn't have the same baggage, I guess you could say, going into The Last Jedi as I did with Legend of Korra, because we had already had so much time away from the original trilogy cast, what with the prequels, the Clone Wars, and all of that stuff, going ahead and getting us used to other characters in this world we knew and loved. So The Force Awakens went ahead and buffered my feelings of grief at losing the old cast as we had known them in the original trilogy. So I will be discussing the character introductions that happened in The Force Awakens when I'm comparing characterizations between The Last Jedi and The Legend of Korra. Now, also, a trilogy of movies is very different from a season of television, but you can vaguely get the story structure is a trilogy is just a season of television broken up into 3 contained sections. So ideally, there is a overarching story in the trilogy, and these are just 3 installments of it, as if it's just 3 parts of a season of television. So these aren't one-to-one comparisons with story structure, but I think you'll get what I'm saying. So here became my conundrum several years later when I started seeing some parallels between The Legend of Korra and The Last Jedi. Why did I love the new direction and new characters introduced in the sequel trilogy and felt like they really honored and built upon the foundations that the original trilogy and prequels started out, and I felt like The Legend of Korra really undercut The Last Airbender, the world building, the characters I did not enjoy, to the point where it's nearly unwatchable to me. I am genuinely not interested in anybody coming into the comments and telling me I'm wrong about The Last Jedi and trying to convince me to hate The Last Jedi. Great, you want me to stop liking it? Tough shit, not gonna happen. If, however, you love The Legend of Korra and want to discuss some of the things that you disagree with me in this video and maybe have me change my mind about the themes or characterization in season 1, I am open to hearing how other people experienced it. I have watched a lot of videos reviewing The Legend of Korra Season 1 and about what they liked about it and how they viewed it, and I just simply disagree with a lot of their points. So while I'm willing to hear you out, I doubt I'll change my mind, and I'm not trying to change yours either. I don't want you to feel like I'm trying to get you to stop liking The Legend of Korra or stop liking Korra as a character. This is just a video for me to explore why I felt the way I did about Korra and The Last Jedi. So with that introduction out of the way, let's go through the basics. What makes a good story to me, and what makes a good installment in an ongoing world. Starting with what makes a story good independently of any of its attachments to other media or other installments. Two things really jumped out at me during my rewatch of Korra Season 1 and The Last Jedi, and those are the characterizations of our new cast and the themes explored in the story. So what makes characterization good, in my opinion? For me, it comes down to having at least one of two things. Either a likable protagonist and or a compelling goal that they're striving for. I am fine. It's actually very interesting to me to see a unlikable character going after a compelling goal. So watching a very unlikable person trying to stop this big bad evil, it's compelling. Morally gray characters are compelling to me. And even downright unlikable characters, if done the right way and given the right goals and things going on around them, can be really compelling and make good characterization to me. And on the flip side, a kind of mundane goal can still be compelling to me if the character is really likable and sweet and interesting and just someone you want to root for, not because of what they're doing, but because of who they are. So, how do you make a character likable? One of the biggest, most popular methods is the save the cat method. And quite literally, sometimes that means you save a cat. A cat is in peril. You save them. Voila, you have saved the cat, and describe something about your character that will make the watcher or reader connect with them and like them. Now, that can take many, many different forms, but for me personally, a key aspect of saving the cat for a character, to me, is it has to be altruistic. There's a very big difference between saving a cat so that people can praise you, so you can prove that you're the biggest and strongest, and wanting people to see you save that cat. There's a very big difference between that and saving the cat when no one else is watching, or saving the cat just for a little girl who wants to have their cat back. You could walk away. You could just wash your hands of the whole situation and nothing bad will happen to you. But your decision to save the cat when you get nothing in return for that is what makes, to me, saving the cat complete. You did something altruistically for someone else, maybe at the expense of yourself, or asking nothing in return. So that's how I think that you can make a character likable. On to themes. What makes a good theme? That's a lot broader of a thought process. I'm not really picky about which themes are explored, but I do want them explored sufficiently. That's not to say you have to have a fable-like lesson in all of your stories. For me, it's more compelling when you bring up a world question and have several different people with different viewpoints on that question and kind of leave it up to the audience to decide what they feel. Our protagonist might make one decision, but that's not, the story isn't saying that was the one and only right decision. I think themes can be largely explored, either complex ones or simple ones, and I'm just as happy with either. So Avatar: The Last Airbender fighting against imperialism and just a psychotic bad guy who wants to take over the entire world is pretty simple. There's kind of a right and wrong. This is the right choice, this is the wrong choice. But it doesn't have to be black and white like that for me to engage with the theme. And now the most nebulous part of the discussion: what makes a good installment in an already set up world? What makes it a good continuation of the story, and what makes a not so great one? But I think it is an important question to consider when discussing Korra and the Last Jedi, because these stories take place directly in the shadow of the original trilogy's characters and what they did with the world. Their effects are very obvious within the story and world that the sequels come into, so we do need to address some of those things in a sequel series. So with that, I'm looking for an organic evolution of what was discussed in the previous series. I'm not looking for a retread of those series. I'm looking for us to take a look at how the world structure has changed, why the original characters in the original trilogies or series, how their impact on the world has flown into the new generation, and not undercutting what the original characters did, but rather building onto that. Now, I don't find showing original characters to have flaws that develop later in life to be undercutting the original in any way, shape, or form. I think that that's actually a really interesting way to go about incorporating original characters into the new stuff, because both of these, the original trilogy and Avatar: The Last Airbender, were coming of age stories. The main characters are still very young at the end of the stories that they took part in. And the lessons that they learned, and now the new responsibilities on their shoulders as they become adults and are expected to keep that up for their entire lives, that is a very interesting thing to analyze. You don't just learn a lesson and then the rest of your, 80 years of life, you're the exact same person that you were and you never have any other issues in your life. That's just not realistic. So I feel like showing flaws is not undercutting the original. It can actually be very important to analyze. However, I think the biggest issues that might arise can come from undercutting the world building of the original series and trivializing the climaxes of other series and trivializing the power sets. I think that can cause a lot of issues and makes me feel like it's not a great continuation of the story. It's rather kind of negating what happened before. So first, give me a character that I can root for, either by making them likable or making them have a compelling goal. Then introduce themes that are well established so that I can think about them and have a clear understanding of what was given to me in the media that I can think about long after I have turned off the show or the movie. And then finally, if you're going to connect this story to stories in this world that have come before, make sure the progression is organic and not undercutting what happened in the previous installment. Rewatching The Legend of Korra Season 1 and The Last Jedi made me realize how much I loved the characterization and themes and connection to the OG trilogy that The Last Jedi had, and made me feel like The Legend of Korra was really weak on themes characterization, and a lot of the connections to the original made me feel like it was undercutting what Aang and his crew had gone through before. So let's get into some specifics. Let's take a look at how the new cast of characters were introduced and characterized in their respective media forms. When we met Korra, Did we find her likable, or did she have a compelling goal? Well, let's see. We get the immediate character traits of her being confident, physically capable, which includes her bending abilities, and she's eager to prove herself as the new Avatar. We see that she is struggling with airbending and the spiritual side of being an Avatar, and so she runs off to Republic City so that she can train in airbending with Tenzin and use the city as a proving ground for her becoming and stepping into her role as the new Avatar after Aang. In Republic City, we see that she loves the spotlight. She loves people looking at her, knowing she's the Avatar and knowing she's more powerful than they are. She doesn't care that she's destroying property or that benders are supposedly oppressing non-benders in the city. She doesn't care about that. She wants to be seen as the big bad Avatar. I'm here to save the day because I'm the strongest. She becomes belligerent at every opportunity. She tells people protesting inequality that they're just jealous of her bending abilities and they just wish they were cool like she was. And she tells them that they're actually just oppressing themselves because she couldn't be wrong, could she? She's awesome. She has bending. She's the Avatar. No need to think about those silly people talking about inequality. She even goes so far to say that she wants to physically attack them just because they're shining a light on inequality in the city. She becomes aggressive without care for the damage she's causing average everyday people who she's supposed to be helping as the Avatar. She doesn't check on the shopkeeper she's supposedly saving from a bending gang. All she cares about is the bending gang sees how strong and powerful she is and knows the Avatar is back in town. She never once even asks how the shopkeeper is doing, if he's okay, if he needs anything. When she's taken in by the police, she doesn't ask Chief Beifong, hey, is the guy who they were roughing up, is he okay? She doesn't care about that. Everything in the writing is showing that she doesn't care about that. But of course, this is the first episode. We are being introduced to her, and flaws are going to come along with that. Flaws that she's going to need to address so that she can grow. And so throughout the entire season, I was looking out for any sign of growth, any sign that she is taking a look at her flaws and changing to become a better person. I specifically looked to see if she did anything altruistically, without expecting some prize in return or acclaim or somebody to say, oh, aren't you so great? And unfortunately, not a single time in the entire season did I see Korra do something kind just because. Every single action she takes is solely to stoke her own ego and make her look better, make her look more powerful. She never does anything just simple and kind for someone without expecting anything in return. Not a single time does she ever consider what's going on with the average populace of Republic City. She never looks into the equalist movement's concerns and them claiming that benders are oppressing them. Never once does she address that. It's solely equalists must be bad. They've kidnapped people, so let's go beat them up. She never talks with Tenzin or Chief Beifong or even Tarlok, who gets her to join the task force. She never talks to them about why the non-benders in the city feel like benders are oppressing them. It's just not a concern for her. She doesn't care. She just wants to beat people up. And she wants to get more powerful. That's her entire character. So at least for me, what we're given on screen, I did not find Korra to be a likable protagonist at all. To the point where there were moments in the series where I just had to sit back and think, are we supposed to like this character? She is physically assaulting just a poor messenger person, giving her a message from someone else, and she is physically assaulting them. Are we supposed to like her? So, okay, she's not likable. Does she have a compelling goal, though? What is going on in the story that she's striving for? We know of 3 goals that she has in the series. She needs to learn airbending, she needs to get in touch with her spiritual side so she can fully take her place as the Avatar, and there's the equalist movement. Now, learning a new bending element could have been a compelling goal if the writer spent any time developing that. Bitter Work is one of my favorite episodes of Avatar: The Last Airbender, when Aang has a block against earthbending and Zuko is trying to learn lightning bending, or in the end, redirecting lightning. These are really impactful storylines that draw you in and make you really root for Aang and Zuko and feel their frustration at not being able to get this element. So it can be done well. That goal can be compelling. Unfortunately, the writers just didn't spend time on it. They just had Korra complaining that she has to train, complaining that she has to meditate, and then destroying ancient artifacts because she can't get it right away. Same with the spiritual side of her lessons. She doesn't try to get in touch with her spiritual side. It's just not something that the writers focus on. They'd rather focus on pro-bending and the love triangle rather than expanding Korra's inner struggles. So what about the external goals? The issues that are brought up in the story that Korra as the Avatar is supposed to be dealing with. Protesters are claiming that there is rampant inequality in Republic City based on your bending status, and that benders are oppressing non-benders. So what's Korra doing about it? She's beating up people fighting for equality? That's what she's doing about it? Cool. She only seeks them out after her teammate is kidnapped by them. And after that, she doesn't ask any questions about their ideology or why they might feel that way or how to address the concerns of this large group of people. The writers simply treat this as they're just bad people asking for equality. Beat 'em up, Korra. So for me, not super compelling. Kind of just feeds into her being unlikable. So the goals that the writers are aiming Korra towards aren't compelling in I think they're going towards the good goal. They're confusing in that I feel like they're pointing Korra in the direction of doing something bad and oppressing people. So we have an unlikable protagonist in Korra. All of the side characters are so one-dimensional that I have nothing to say about them that doesn't directly relate to Korra. They don't have any character arcs, and they don't do anything of note in the story except for be plot devices for Korra's story to move forward. And she doesn't have any compelling goals she's going after. Her goal is kind of get a good grade in this class, but complain the entire time, and stop a movement for equality, which, as we just discussed, not a great goal. So we're already failing on the characterization in the Legend of Korra. As I'll go into in the themes section, the equalist movement on paper appears to be legitimate. They appear to have legitimate concerns about benders controlling every aspect of the government and the police. But the writers weren't interested in analyzing it. They were just interested in saying, no, Korra needs somebody to punch. Equalists. And that just didn't sit right with me. It felt like the writers were saying Korra's goal needs to be to uphold the status quo and keep oppressive powers in place. Because, well, Korra's kind of the ultimate oppressive power in the Avatar. Amon, the head of the Equalists, even mentions it, and it's not explored at all. So how does Star Wars differ? How does Star Wars characterize our new cast that is coming into this old world? Are they likable, and do they have compelling goals? I'll start with their intros in The Force Awakens, as that's kind of the first part of the season of the sequel trilogy, because how they're introduced is going to directly tie to how we feel about flaws being revealed in The Last Jedi. And fun enough, we have 3 distinct new characters that all have their own intricacies that are independent of one another. They don't fully rely on the other to be interesting. We're first introduced to Poe Dameron, the best pilot in the Resistance. He's a risk taker. He urges his source to run and get away, save himself so that Poe can sacrifice himself fighting off the First Order soldiers coming into town, and he's willing to give up a claim by giving the important information to his droid BB-8 and sending BB-8 off into the desert so that hopefully he can stay away from the First Order. We see that Poe Dameron is willing to give up personal things and personal accolades so that he can help a larger cause. He is impulsive, rushing into battle when the smarter idea would be to run and hide. He's a smart aleck to the big bad villain. But then he immediately helps a stormtrooper trying to escape the First Order, steals a TIE fighter, and instead of, again, running and saving himself, he goes directly back to the planet of Jakku, where his droid is, so that he can get the droid and get the information to a cause larger than himself. So Poe immediately saves the cat by telling his source to get out of there, save himself. Poe will hold off the attacking enemy troopers. Poe knows that it's unlikely that he's going to be able to survive, but he's willing to make that sacrifice so another can survive. The fact that he's a part of the Resistance shows that he's willing to work for a cause bigger than himself. Sure, he's cocky and impulsive and rushes into battle, but he tries to channel that into helping the Resistance rather than stoking his own ego. A great small moment that I love and think is great characterization is when Poe is running from the First Order in the TIE fighter. He asks his new stormtrooper buddy what his name is. Stormtrooper replies FN2187, because that's his designation and the only name he's ever known. And Poe does something interesting. He asks the stormtrooper, "Is it okay if I call you Finn?" He doesn't demand that the stormtrooper accepts his new name that Poe wants to call him. He doesn't say, "Well, I'm cocky and sure of myself, I'm the main character, so you're gonna do whatever I say." He asks, he says, "Is it okay if I call you Finn?" The stormtrooper replies yes, because he's never had an individual name before, only a number. And the scene continues. Small moments like that, where characters are shown to genuinely care about the thoughts and feelings of others, really does go a long way to make a character likable. Unfortunately, Korra never had such moments. And what was his goal? Stop the First Order, a tyrannical government who is trying to control the entire galaxy through fire and blood. Basic Star Wars shtick, but goals don't have to be super complex or shades of gray in order for them to be compelling. Stopping the Fire Nation in Avatar: The Last Airbender was super compelling. Didn't need to be all that complex. So, characterization. Is Poe Dameron likable? I'd say yes. Does Poe Dameron have a compelling goal? Also yes. In this time, we also meet FN2187, later known as Finn. He is a stormtrooper who has been raised since birth through the First Order and programmed to do whatever they say. But in his opening scene, he refuses to open fire on a group of innocent civilians. He makes this decision not because he's going to get anything out of it, he's actually going to be punished for it. But he feels like it's wrong to do, and so he makes the decision to break his orders and not kill them. Then he frees Poe Dameron and escapes from the First Order. Now Finn wants to just get out of Dodge, never come near the First Order or the Resistance ever again, but Poe convinces him that no, we've got to get down to get this droid, and Finn says, fine, whatever, I'll go along with it. Now through the movie, Finn's goals change and evolve in really interesting ways. It's not that we're just compelled by Finn's goal to get away from the First Order. We're compelled by, are his goals going to change? Is he going to evolve from just want to escape the First Order into a new goal that's more compelling to us? It's his journey that's compelling, not the initial goal. We can see that Finn is a decent person at heart. He doesn't want to kill anybody, and he's willing to help others achieve their goals, even at the expense of his own. So Finn saves the cat early as well. He refuses to kill innocent people, even though he will gain nothing in return. He just doesn't kill because it would be wrong to, even though he knows that he's going to be harmed by his supervisors because of that decision. So he escapes the First Order. So, is Finn a likable character? I'd say yes. Maybe not as likable as Poe or Rey, but he's a solid character. And are his goals compelling? His evolution of goals definitely is. We really want to see if he's going to make the decision to stand fight for the Resistance once he sees what they're up against. And he does. And then we're introduced to Rey, a scrapper on the planet of Jakku, the same planet that Poe had sent BB-8 out onto to keep his information safe. Rey is barely getting by. She's having to salvage parts from a crash of a Star Destroyer. She lives in a destroyed AT-AT, and she's having to do dangerous things to get food. She's paid in rations, and not very large rations. And so we see that she's capable, but down on her luck. Then she hears BB-8 being attacked by a junker, and she rushes to his aid. Not because she wants anything from BB-8, but just because she doesn't like the idea of a droid, a semi-sentient being bullied and sold apart for scraps by this other junker. She immediately points BB-8 in the direction of town and says, "Get lost. I just didn't want to see you get hurt like that." But BB-8, of course, follows her home. And then when the person giving out her rations tells her that she'll get so many rations to, if she turns in BB-8, she refuses. She says, "No, I'm willing to take the consequences of not turning him in because I think it's the right thing to do." Saving the cat right there. And then Rey meets Finn, and she's excited about helping out the Resistance. But a very important aspect to her goals is that while right now her goal is to get BB-8 to the Resistance, to help them defeat the First Order, that's not her long-term goal. Her long-term goal is to discover who her parents are, wait on the planet of Jakku for them to return for her. This long-term goal is explored more in The Last Jedi, and it morphs in the end of The Force Awakens when Rey learns that she's Force sensitive. Now her goal becomes, what is my place in all of this? Who am I? Now honestly, with Rey's characterization and her power set, I don't have an issue with her just finding out that she's Force sensitive and then being able to do stuff with the Force. I don't have a problem with that at all, because that's kind of built into the canon of Star Wars. Luke is able to use the Force to guide his blaster shot into the Death Star to destroy it with barely any experience with the Force at all. And Rey knows a lot more about what the Force can do based on the legends of Luke in her time period. So she's more aware of the possibilities of the Force than Luke was. And so honestly, if I were captured on an enemy ship, I'd be trying out all the tricks that I had ever heard about. She's able to, out of pure adrenaline, fight off Kylo Ren. It's not that she's just so much more powerful, it's that there's adrenaline and Kylo Ren is already struggling with his pulling towards the light. So Kylo Ren already not centered the way that Darth Vader had been, and Rey working off of adrenaline. And then, sure, is it a little quick that she's able to do a Jedi mind trick on the Stormtrooper to get him to release her? Maybe. But honestly, with how the Force is set up and all of the other pieces of media surrounding it, the Force kind of guides you to doing what you need in the moment. That's not unheard of. So I don't feel like that's a fault in her characterization or the story writing. So, is Rey likable? Yes. Does she have compelling goals? Also, yes. Now, transitioning into The Last Jedi, what I really wanted to do and what jumped out at me the most is comparing Poe Dameron to Korra. They're both quite similar in many of their character traits. Both are brash, impulsive, confident, and they're the best at what they do, and what they do is kick ass. Now, what makes those character traits interesting is what they're paired with, and what the characters do with those character traits. That can make them either very likable characters or very unlikable characters. As I discussed earlier, Korra only ever uses these traits in service to herself, to make herself look better, to put herself in the spotlight, so other people think that she's great. That's the only way she ever uses them. She never once tries to use them to help others quietly or in the background. She only ever uses it to make herself put in the position of most importance. Poe Dameron, on the other hand, uses these traits to try and help a larger cause. He takes the time to get to know people like Finn. He even gives Finn his jacket in The Force Awakens. And while he's confident taking command, he never does it to put himself in the spotlight. He does it to help a larger cause. When Korra shows character flaws, I never felt that the story was actually saying that that was a flaw in Korra that she needed to work on. I always felt like the show just kind of said, oh, look at how quirky she is. Isn't this just a cool character trait that she has? When Korra forcibly kisses Mako as he is actively explaining to her that he doesn't want to be with her in that way, almost a direct parallel between Aang and Katara in the Ember Island Players, when Katara is saying, I'm confused, I don't know what I feel, so I don't want to do anything right now, and then Aang forcibly kisses her. In that story, it's treated as Aang fucked up. Like, that was bad for Aang to do. Katara gets angry and stalks away, and Aang admits, like, why did I do that? Why did I hurt Katara like that by forcing a kiss on her when she was telling me that she didn't want that? But when Korra does it to Mako, Mako just kind of stands there, and then Bolin's pain at that, because Korra has been semi-dating Bolin this entire episode, Bolin's pain at that is made into a punchline, a joke. His pain isn't taken seriously, and the narrative points to the fact that Mako is actually just as much to blame as Korra in this situation, and they never really address Korra's actions, only Mako's. When Korra is taken into the police station after destroying the city, Chief Beifong tries to reprimand her for that, but the story never really makes it seem like that was a legitimate reprimand. It kind of makes it more seem like, isn't Beifong so uptight? What's she upset about? And Korra never faces any consequences for that whatsoever. Tenzin just comes in and bails her out because she's the Avatar. And so that flaw in her harming all those innocent city people isn't addressed at all. So all of those things leads Korra's character flaws to not be seen as something that is just a flaw that we can still look past, and it's like, okay, it's okay if she grows from it. They just add to an unlikable character. Poe, on the other hand, has earned so much goodwill through The Force Awakens and the way that his flaw comes about that we can still root for him and love him even if we don't really like him right now. Even when Poe ignores direct orders and continues the bombing on the Dreadnought, we see where he's coming from. He has a squadron, he has a plan, and they have the ability to take out this huge threat to the Resistance and the galaxy at large. And of course, we've seen him do similar things before. He's the one who destroyed Starkiller Base. He saved everybody when Maz Kanata's place was being attacked by the First Order. He swooped in and blew things up. And that was all well and good. They were excellent choices. But then he's given orders to stop, and he ignores them. We've seen Poe's great and heroic traits. Even when he chews out Admiral Holdo and stages a coup and takes over the bridge, we, at least I, didn't see that as a good thing, and we saw that he needed to take several seats. But we understood where he was coming from. We understood his frustrations, and we didn't turn against him because of these flaws. We wanted him to understand why. We know what type of person Poe is, and we know that he's not doing this for personal gain. He genuinely thinks he's helping the cause by doing this. A noble trait, but still a character flaw. So seeing him as a complex character who I was interested to see what he's gonna do next was compelling, flaws included. And no, this isn't terrible writing that Holdo didn't tell him the plan and that's the only reason that he showed those flaws. The Resistance is a military-esque organization who they know spies can be a part of, and they're in dire situations. They need to have a secret plan so that they can survive, and so everyone's not going to be privy to those plans, especially somebody who just disobeyed direct orders, and even when it was explained to him why, he did not seem to get it. So why would the new leader in charge trust him with this information? After all, the moment he learns of the real plan, he immediately spills it to Finn and Rose with a bogey, we can say, overhearing the conversation, leading them to not be able to escape properly. So it seems like holding back that information from Poe and just expecting him to do what soldiers do and follow orders, trust the judgment of those ahead of you. It seems like she made the right decision in trying to hold that info back from him. I don't blame Poe for telling Finn and Rose and kind of ruining the escape plan, nor do I blame Holdo for withholding that information from Poe. Character flaws can be interesting, and we can still like characters through them if they're handled well. And so by the end of the movie, Poe has grown as a character. He's addressed his character flaws and is now able to take a more holistic look at the rebellion and what costs are acceptable and which should be avoided, and he's more willing to accept the judgment of others. And this helps him become a better leader, not just of his X-Wing squadron, but of the Resistance as a whole. Now, Poe Dameron's characterization caused a lot of discourse in the media, as whenever a male character needs to learn a lesson from a female character, the misogynists come out in full force. Now, they've got no problem with it if a man needs to learn a lesson from another man, or if a woman needs to learn a lesson from a man. But if the roles are reversed, then, whoo boy, do the misogynists have something to say about it. We're being mad at men. We're man-haters. And it's like, all right. So trying to wade through all of that and talk about Poe's story is difficult online. So in my opinion, The Last Jedi managed to keep Poe a compelling and likable character even when showing off his flaws, and he had compelling goals throughout. And same with Rey. Rey remained a likable character. Even when she was being a little belligerent at Luke trying to get him to train her, we understood where she was coming from. She wasn't doing this so that she could become more powerful. She was doing it to try and find her place in the galaxy, and she saw the Resistance needed help, and she saw Luke as the best option for that. She was seeking out knowledge, and she chose compassion instead of vengeance in the end. And her goals remained compelling. The goal to learn her place in the galaxy and figure out who her parents were evolved into the goal to learn more about the Jedi way of using the Force and to bring Ben Solo back to the light. Finn evolved in really great ways that expanded the galaxy as well. His first thought upon waking from the Bacta tank is to figure out if Rey is alright, and then he wants to get out of Dodge again because he doesn't really want to be a part of this war. However, upon learning that the First Order can track through light space, hyperspace, whatever it's called in the Star Wars universe, he immediately is willing to help out and go behind enemy lines to take out that method of tracking. The Last Jedi was about Finn learning about the galaxy as a whole, expanding his worldview from just his small understanding of what it was like in the First Order and his attachment to his friends, and expanding his awareness to everyone in the galaxy and how he can not only help his friends, but also help a lot more people, even if he doesn't know them personally. Rose showed him the plights of ordinary people who were being harmed by rich people who were making bank off of both the First Order and the Resistance. There's a lot of shades of gray here. The Resistance had no problem funding people who are enslaving others and who are also selling to the First Order. It gives a lot of nuance to this issue because war is not black and white. Arms dealers make money on both sides, and so no cause is perfectly moral and has no immoral undercurrents to it. Getting the tools to help defeat the bad guys might be kind of bad in and of itself. So through spending time with Rose, Finn's goal evolved from just protecting my friends to I can work with the team to protect the galaxy as a whole. No more running, we're gonna stand and fight. And then finally, to a change in perspective of we're not doing this because we hate the First Order, we're doing this to protect people, protect them from the evils of the First Order, and protect those that we love. So yeah, Finn remained a likable character, and his goals grew and evolved and stayed compelling. And so that's why I feel like the characterization in The Last Jedi succeeded while the characterization in Korra utterly failed. I will talk about Luke's characterization when I discuss how The Last Jedi treated the original trilogy. And so onto the themes of The Last Jedi and Legend of Korra. I felt like Korra was aimed at a more mature audience, people who had grown up with The Last Airbender as a child and now were in their teens or young adulthood, as the characters in Korra were aged up to be in their late teens and adults, with Tenzin and Beifong taking a great deal of screen time, and the issues that they introduced were more complex than just imperialism and dictatorship, bad, genocide, bad. There were a little bit more attempts at complex themes of inequality. So how are we introduced to the themes? Well, our first taste of the theme of inequality happens in episode 1 with a coded, annoying man yelling into a microphone. He is not conventionally attractive, and Korra completely discounts him when he talks about inequality. He's making faces at her, and Korra doesn't think that his arguments are compelling, nor does she make any effort to get any information on these allegations of inequality. But inequality is a really serious issue, one that many people directly have experience with. So treating it as something that shouldn't be taken seriously was a little bit confusing to me. Korra immediately discounts him by saying that he's just jealous of her bending abilities and he's actually just oppressing himself, which is shocking, honestly, coming from someone who's supposed to be a protagonist, especially because those things weren't discussed later on in the series, or, proven to be incorrect later in the series. Those are two allegations that people in power consistently tell those fighting for equality in the real world. I have heard from the mouths of personal bigots that I know, X group of disenfranchised people are just oppressing themselves. Us who have the power, we're not oppressing them. They could do anything they wanted to, they're just choosing to be oppressed. I have verbatim heard that from bigots saying that, like, Native Americans don't have anything to complain about. They're not actually being oppressed by laws. And it's like, to hear somebody supposed to be the protagonist saying that is awful. Same thing with the "you're just jealous." Poor people aren't oppressed in this country. They're just jealous of all the money that the rich people have. So they're just making up things to be angry at so they can steal all of our money. And then what does Amon do? He steals our bending, which the themes are just so frustrating, because in our real world, people who are in a place of privilege view their privilege as an inherent part of themselves. And if you take that privilege away and give everybody equal footing, then that means you must have removed something intrinsic to me in order to get that equality. And that's exactly what the equalists are doing. The writers fed into this false narrative that right-wing political people claim those fighting for equality are trying to do. Because if rich people are taxed fairly and are unable to steal money through wages from their workers, if they're made to pay taxes, they're not losing an intrinsic part of themselves. They'll still be fine. They'll be able to live their lives exactly the way they've always been living them. But the fear tactic is poor people are just trying to steal rich people's money, so poor people become rich and rich people become poor, when that is false. That is not accurate. Black people are not trying to villainize whiteness and being white. They're just saying, can we not have you get benefits because you're white and us get treated poorly because we're Black? That's it. They're not trying to take away your whiteness unless you think that being white makes you inherently better. So the themes that were explored in The Legend of Korra, I found problematic, to say the least. Because the narrative never explores why the equalists are saying that there's oppression. We can look at the structure of the government and the policing system and see that it appears that only benders are in charge of both the police and the government, and it's not explored in the narrative, even though I felt like one of the main themes of season 1 of Legend of Korra was supposed to be this inequality between benders and non-benders. It's not talked about at all. It's just assumed, I guess, to be not true, even though we know what happens when a group of people are all in power and nobody in any other group is in power. We know that those in power oppress the others who don't have a seat at the table. We know that through our own lives. So that's kind of what we're just left with is, well, the entire council seems to be benders, and the entire police force that we see are all benders. So it kind of seems like they are in positions of authority where non-benders are not, so I'm confused. But it kind of felt like The Legend of Korra wanted us to take these societal issues seriously. They wanted us to see them as a more mature take on the Avatar Last Airbender world. But then Korra's running through the city destroying public property to a jaunty musical theme, and it's not taken seriously. So do we need to take this societal issue seriously, or don't we? Non-benders are complaining that benders run roughshod over non-benders, and here we have Korra doing that exact thing, and it's never addressed. It has silly music attached to it. In Avatar: The Last Airbender, there was definitely its fair share of property destruction due to the hijinks of the Aang Yang. But that was never directly tied to the themes of the story. And most of that was relegated to season 1, where it wasn't being taken as seriously. It was much more a kids show, funny hijinks type of thing. The destruction of Amashu as they're sliding down the mail chute things and then bouncing off of rooftops and smashing the guy's pottery and stuff, that's not directly talking to the themes of imperialism. It was just kind of used in the 3rd episode or something of The Last Airbender, 3rd or 4th, of The Last Airbender as, look at this cute, funny kid show. When Korra is destroying people's property, that's directly tied to the stated themes of the story. Inequality of benders versus non-benders, benders doing whatever they want, and in the end oppressing non-benders. Korra says at the end of episode 1 that the entire city is out of whack, but as the audience, we haven't seen any evidence of it other than Korra is upset she has to pay for food. She's upset she can't just destroy property without the police getting angry at her. And she's upset that protesters are making her feel a little uncomfortable by not worshiping her as the Avatar god of all bending. Those are the only things that we've seen Korra get upset about. So it's kind of confusing as to what exactly she means by the city is out of whack. She could be talking about the homelessness issue, people not getting along, or the criminal activity with the gangs. But it's never really explicitly stated, and she doesn't get angry at the mobs. She just wants to beat them up and make them see her as the Avatar. She doesn't get upset that they're destroying this person's property and trying to extort him. She just wants to beat him up. In Avatar: The Last Airbender Season 2, Ba Sing Se was clearly out of whack, and the characters explicitly stated why, and that fit with the themes. In Korra, she just says it's out of whack, and it's not explored. And when this ideology of inequality in Republic City is completely dropped in the second half of the first season in favor of the Equalists are just villainous characters trying to steal people's bending away, Korra just needs to beat them up. When the ideology questions are dropped, then it's kind of confusing as to what the message is supposed to be, because the message turns from we need to fight inequality to Korra needs to uphold the status quo and make sure that benders remain in charge. The fact that the Equalists never get to point to direct things in the society that show that they're being oppressed also leads to the unfortunate conclusion that the writers are trying to say, hey, people fighting for equality, they actually are just full of hot air. They don't have any legitimate claims, and you should just ignore them, and everything's fine. Which is not really what I want to see. I feel like it's a really bad message to send. The writing agrees with the base assumption that benders and non-benders are fundamentally separate types of people. When the Equalists threatened to make a show at the pro-bending finals, Chief Beifong explicitly states that benders need to show the Equalists that they're in power, that they're not going to bow to their demands. Yet again, having one of our main characters, who I assume we're supposed to like, explicitly saying we need to use our bending to physically stop non-benders from trying to get equality. It seems like they had pretty clear ideas of what ideologies they wanted to explore in the first season, and then midway through it just kind of petered out and they didn't address it anymore or address it in any kind of real way other than the two people in power in the organizations fighting each other. It's kind of the extent of it. So both The Legend of Korra and The Last Jedi focus on conflicts with villains who want to fundamentally change the world order that the protagonists want. Neither are very fleshed out or complex, but they try. So just like the Empire before it, the First Order isn't super compelling on its own, but when you introduce characters who are complex and part of that organization, so Finn and Kylo Ren, then it becomes a compelling villain that you want to explore more of. The Equalists remain, quite frankly, a faceless organization. We don't get to know a single member of the Equalist movement and see why they are doing what they're doing. It's just vague, they're evil, even though they're fighting for equality. End of story. Now, many times the lesson of the story doesn't need to be explicitly stated. Just the fact that questions are brought up at all and seen from several different perspectives can be enough to fully look at themes and make you want to think about them more. I feel like The Last Jedi did this really well. There were three main themes that I resonated with in The Last Jedi. The examination of the black and white morality that the old trilogy pushed, the idea that you don't have to be somebody of a special bloodline in order to be important, and getting up after your failures. In the original trilogy, it was the good guys of the rebels fighting against the flat evil of the Empire. That was it. There was no real analysis of morality within that. It's the classic morality struggle in much of fantasy, which, if you can't tell by my channel name, I really love. Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, and Avatar: The Last Airbender all fall into this theme of black and white morality, good versus evil. The Last Jedi really examined that and took a look at the flaws that are in the Jedi training and the Jedi Order, and really made you take a look at whether or not that's the best way to do things. It also took the supposedly flat evil of the First Order and gave us compelling characters that we saw positive traits in. Finn when he left the First Order, and Kylo Ren, always fighting against his pull to the light. I was so excited to finally have a voice given to the flaws of the Jedi Order. Ever since the prequels, I've been screaming about how terrible the Jedi Order is. And yet again, let's remember that I love the prequels. They have a special place in my heart. And you can hate an organization and still think they're compelling and well written. Okay? Moving on. I was really excited that Luke gave voice to so many of the critiques that I had had of the Jedi Order, and we're discussing them. And the things that are put forth is that maybe we shouldn't just recreate the Jedi Order, but rather learn from the mistakes and make something better. Something gray, perhaps, maybe. Now, Luke takes an extremist view to this and sort of says, just get rid of it all, none of it is worth saving, while Rey wants to retain some of the Jedi teachings. And a full answer is never given as to what is the right choice. As Yoda says so wisely in his ghost form, we are what they grow beyond. This discussion is going to be ongoing, and it is going to change and evolve with each new generation. We don't need to come up with here's the outline to what the new Jedi Order should be right now. We just need to think about it and discuss it. I also loved how the Force was expanded and the themes of how the Force does not belong to the Jedi. Luke tells Rey to think that the Force is going to die just because the Jedi Order is destroyed is pure arrogance. The Force will outlive us all. It's not going to go away just because the Jedi Order is disbanded. And that's something that I think that a lot of Star Wars fans really needed to hear. The Last Jedi also brings up the themes of continuing on after failure, sometimes catastrophic failure. Building upon what we learned about Luke's training academy in The Force Awakens, Luke has to deal with the fact that he failed at training the next generation of Jedi. One of his Padawans went to the dark side and killed everyone, and Luke blames himself. This is a fascinating thing to examine in Luke's psyche because, per The Force Awakens, Luke decides to abandon the Resistance altogether and abscond to an island where no one can find him. He decides to live out his life in exile. His whole story arc was coming to terms with his failure and knowing that despite how catastrophically he fucked up, he can still get up and try to do better this next time. And he learns that lesson by the end. He goes into his fight with Kylo Ren not to kill him, not to physically harm him, but to give the Resistance time to escape so they can survive and carry on and make better decisions. Luke makes his final stand against the entire First Order even after he has failed so much. The same thing happens with Poe and Finn. Poe succeeds in destroying the Dreadnought, but he fails in his ability to keep his squadron alive. He fails in seeing the larger picture. And over the course of the movie, Poe learns that it's okay that he had failed then because he can learn and do better next time. He had a failure of mindset, of collective action and trusting others and not throwing their lives away. And he learns and becomes a better leader for it. Not only that, but it's okay to fail in your objective if it leads to better circumstances later on. If it leads to saving people's lives so that they can survive and fight better the next day, that failure is okay. Same with Finn and Rose in their failure to stop the First Order ship from tracking through hyperspace. They still expanded the world and learned about themselves and the galaxy, and even though they failed, they were able to escape and help them fight on the planet that they all landed on. They were able to get up after their failure, having learned lessons, and fight another day. And finally, the most Star Wars of all Star Wars themes, you. Yes, you can be a hero. You don't have to have some fancy bloodline. You don't have to be the chosen one of the Force. Anybody can make a difference just by getting up and doing what's right, doing what you can to help others. That's so empowering, and it genuinely feels the most Star Wars of Star Wars themes to me. Rey was obsessed with knowing who her parents were. She thought that by learning this, she would be able to find her place in the galaxy and know what to do. But then in the dark side cave, she was shown exactly what she needed. Not who her parents were, just her. She was enough. She didn't need some parentage to tell her her place in the galaxy. She got to decide that herself. And this is reinforced when Kylo Ren reveals that she's a nobody. Her parents sold her off for drinking money. And I can't explain to you how that made me feel in the theater and how I felt like that was such a powerful and amazing culmination of her journey to learn who her parents are. It was so refreshing to not have somebody just be the child of Obi-Wan or be Luke's secret daughter or something. She was just Rey. She wasn't doing these things because she was somehow part of a great bloodline. She was just getting up and taking one step after another because she believed it was what was right. And she became a hero. Han Solo and Obi-Wan didn't become fan favorites because of their bloodlines or the families they came from. People love those characters because of what the characters did on their own, not connected to some fancy family. That's kind of a great part of Star Wars. Yes, is the Skywalker legacy cool and fun to examine how this one family interacts with the galaxy through generations? Yes. But that's not all Star Wars is. And finally, we have this theme shown in the very last scene of the movie, where the little enslaved boy on Canto Bight is recounting the story of the mighty Jedi Knight, Luke Skywalker, as he stands alone against the forces of the First Order and defeats them, letting the resistance survive. Then we see him go out, force pull his broom to him, and stand in the starlight, looking up at the stars in the galaxy, starlight radiating off of his broom handle to make it look like a lightsaber, as he has the ring with the insignia of the resistance upon it. And we know that that kid isn't someone special. He doesn't have a special family. He isn't chosen by the Force. But he can still be a hero, too. So how did these different stories connect to the original? Honestly, I don't really need any direct connections to the original stories in order for me to think that a sequel set in the same world works. The story can stand alone on its own merits and not need to connect, but as both The Legend of Korra and the sequel trilogy happen in the direct shadow of the original cast and crew, we incorporate that, of course, in the storytelling here. So how did Legend of Korra and Last Jedi incorporate the old world building into the new? Now, I thought that it was really nice that Aang and company created this city where everybody from all four nations could live together in harmony. They were trying to connect the world again. But I feel like there were aspects of that that could have been developed better, especially tying it to the themes that they seem to try and want to play with of inequality. If they had tied the direct actions of Aang and company to the development of inequality between benders and non-benders, either by their own negligence or something that they just didn't think of beforehand, I guess those are the same things. But if we had tied that theme that was being expressed, an issue in the city, to original cast who created the city, that could have been a really great way to incorporate the OG characters in an organic and honoring way. But they didn't do that. I feel like the way that they expanded upon bending in this series kind of undercut a lot of the big moments in The Last Airbender. The Last Airbender endeavored to make even super powerful methods of bending have some grounding to them. They had weaknesses, like you could get around airbending by throwing a rope net over the airbender because the air would go through the ropes. There is a weakness to airbending that allows others to be able to take control. There is lightning bending, which you have to be completely centered in yourself in order to do, and it's still very dangerous. And blood bending. You have to be a very powerful waterbender under the light of a full moon in order to blood bend. And finally, energy bending, which only the Avatar can do. Those all were really impactful parts of the first series that were kind of cheapened in The Legend of Korra. Now, earthbenders learning how to metal bend makes perfect sense. It's just a natural progression of bending that's not morally abhorrent, and it doesn't require you to be mentally super centered like lightning was described to be. So that makes perfect sense as an evolution of bending. However, blood bending, the way it was used in Legend of Korra, kind of just seemed like they wanted to overpower the main characters, and instead of having nuanced takes on this power, it was just they're OP, protagonist needs to be more OP in order to defeat them type of thing. And it wasn't ever explained how Amon was able to use bloodbending to take away somebody's ability to bend, to the extent that even Katara, the best healer we know of, can't heal. You would think that if it was just bloodbending, then they'd be able to be healed by somebody of comparable talent. But they couldn't, and it just kind of felt like a cheap shock value way to make us feel some stakes when it comes to our characters and what Amon can do to them. Energy bending and taking away the Fire Lord's ability to bend was the culmination of 3 seasons worth of Aang being a pacifist and trying to find non-lethal methods every chance he could. It was a huge climactic emotional moment when he was able to remove the Fire Lord's bending. And then we have in the new season of Korra, it's just, oh yeah, this guy can do that too. And it really felt like it undercut the impact that had in The Last Airbender. The massive overpowering of bloodbending also kind of rubbed me the wrong way, with Yakone being able to bloodbend an entire room without moving under the light of a full day. Like, he didn't need the moon, he didn't need his hands, and he could do it to an entire room, including Aang. That just, it felt like a power-up that undercut the real groundedness of how bloodbending came about in the original series. So I felt like a lot of the connections to the original from Legends of Korra was just a, hey look, you remember this cool thing, right? We're gonna massively overpower it. That's cool, right? You like that, right? That's what it felt like to me, at least. How The Last Jedi interacted with the original trilogy was really great in the way that it examined a lot of the themes from those old trilogies and evolved them for modern times. How they took the themes of black and white morality and made it more gray, and how they questioned the Jedi Order. I felt like the evolution of Force powers was also quite natural, because the Force has always been a very nebulous power. Things just kind of appear and they're all of a sudden a thing now. Like, who knew Force lightning was a thing until Palpatine used it in the very last movie of the trilogy? Like, that wasn't a thing before. And so I felt like Force Skype and Force projection was just a natural way to progress the power structure of the Force while tying it into the themes. The themes of Rey and Kylo Ren connecting and her pulling him from the dark side to the light side, them examining the different perspectives of the falling out between Luke and Ben Solo, those were all enhanced with the Force connections that they had. The connection wasn't there just to say, isn't this cool? It fed into the themes and story. Same with Luke projecting himself to fight the First Order and confront Kylo Ren, Ben Solo for the last time. It fed into the themes and story rather than just being isn't this a crazy new power? Now, many people felt like the way that Luke's character was handled was spitting in the face of the original trilogy and Luke's character arc there. They felt like the way he treated Kylo Ren or Ben Solo during training and when he discovered he might be turning to the dark side was something that Luke would never do. After all, he refused to kill Vader, who had already done all these terrible things. Why would he even consider killing someone who hadn't? But I think that it was a really great progression and showed how much weight was on Luke's shoulders. He has been hailed as the hero of the galaxy, and he has tasked himself with reviving the Jedi Order and training a new generation of Jedi who will keep the galaxy safe. And then he finds out that one of his Padawans is very likely to turn dark and hurt the galaxy like Vader had. It makes perfect sense to me that all that trauma from the first trilogy would resurface and he would have that split second of instinct that tells him to end this threat. Because as we saw, it was a split second instinct that he immediately regretted. He didn't have a long drawn out fight with Ben Solo, berating him for turning to the dark side. He double checked his thoughts that Ben Solo might be turning to the dark side, saw the damage he would cause, and for a split second ignited his saber with those old feelings of, I have to stop this threat. And then he overcame them and stopped. That shows character progression and also regression in the face of trauma. It makes sense for Luke's character and the responsibilities placed on him. And then he runs away. He's ashamed that that is what it all brought him. But at the end of The Last Jedi, he comes back. He has the character arc of getting up from his failures, and just because you succeeded in saving the galaxy once doesn't mean you're never going to fall. It just means you get back up and you try to help again. And that's what he does. He gets back up after his failure, and instead of wailing at somebody with a lightsaber like he did in the OG trilogy, he evades, he distracts, he lets the resistance get away, and he accepts that he is not the one bearing the full responsibility of holding on to the Jedi or the rebellion, now the resistance. He accepts that his time of being in control is over and others can take up that burden now. And so he faces Ben Solo not to fight him, but to distract and help others get away. I also appreciated how the big bad in The Last Jedi wasn't just another Death Star. We've had 3 already. We can give it a rest. We can give Death Stars a rest now. But it did use Death Star tech in an original and unique, more contained way in the battering ram. That makes sense as a progression and using the old trilogy to tell new stories with new themes and new bad guys to face. This movie was more about ideology and figuring out who you are and why you're fighting than it was big lightsaber duels. While there were some great duels in here and lightsaber fights like with Ren and Rey in the Red Room, which was super dope, it wasn't just about that. It was about more and expanding from the original trilogy while honoring it. So I felt that The Last Jedi really honored the previous trilogies and didn't spit on Luke's character. I thought it really expanded Luke's character in a great and heroic way. And so there you have it, my very long analysis of why I loved The Last Jedi and did not love Legend of Korra. Most of it just comes down to me feeling like Korra was not well written and didn't have great characters, and wasn't able to stand on its own. It had nothing to do with its connection to Avatar: The Last Airbender. I didn't feel like that's where it failed the most as a story. I did think that The Last Jedi stood alone as a great story in general, but also connected wonderfully to the old cast and old themes brought up and re-examined. I was really invested in Rey, Finn, Poe, and now Rose, and I was really excited to see what they would do in The Rise of Skywalker. When the first season of Legend of Korra ended, I didn't really have any desire to see Korra again or any of her friends again. It just wasn't something that I was interested in, and that's kind of a sucky feeling. But that was just my experience with these two stories. You might have experienced them completely differently. I'll be the first to admit, characters like Korra in general, I just don't like. I don't find them to be compelling, and I don't find them to be likable. I can't relate to them or connect to them, and I kind of start rooting against them, like I did with Korra. I really wanted her to get knocked down a peg, and she never really was, only artificially. So if you connect to characters like Korra or see parts of yourself in her, I get why you would enjoy The Legend of Korra, whereas I didn't. And I unashamedly like characters like Poe, Finn, and Rey. But if they don't connect to you as characters, then yeah, you're gonna have a different experience than I did. So I think in the end, my takeaway is that everything needs to be judged based on its own merits. Just because it's based in the same world as a previous story that you loved doesn't mean it's going to be great, and doesn't mean that it's going to be trash. It's just the way the individual writers decide to address the story. The solution here isn't to never touch those blessed worlds that we love so much and never touch them again, but it's also not to shove so much fan service into the story that it's like we're just rewatching the original just on steroids. I think maybe the best thing writers can do is just ignore the fans. Just write the story that you want to write, regardless of trying to keep your hero glasses on and rose-tinted glasses on when you look at the world and look at original characters. I find it much more compelling storytelling to explore faults in people and issues than it is to revisit a world and have there be no problems whatsoever, no character flaws to overcome, and just float around in this world that we like. As a writer, you're never going to be able to please everyone. Everyone has their own tastes and preferences and what they connect to in a story. So trying to cater to everyone just isn't feasible at all. The best you can do is tell the story that you want to tell. It's going to be way more original than trying to pander to the audiences, and it's probably going to be more likely to make a long-lasting impact and make people think about it long after they've left the theater or turned off the show. Again, if you like Korra, I'm not trying to say that you shouldn't like her. I'm just explaining why I didn't. And you can just turn this video off and never think about me again if you disagree. That's okay. I'm not interested in any comments trying to get me to hate something that I love, but I am willing to listen to people trying to explain why they loved something that I didn't. Thank you for watching, and I do hope you check out my other stuff. I have a completely unreliable schedule because I live with other people, and most of the time that I have the house free is when I'm also at work, so I never really have the chance to film because I don't like filming when other people are in the house. So there's that. So you can check me out on TikTok. I do post more regularly over there. I usually have more time to film short little bits on TikTok under High Fantasy Writing. So go and say hi to me over there. But do make sure that you do leave a like and possibly subscribe if you want those intermittent, very, very long essays exploring why I like media or don't like it. So again, thank you for watching. My name is April, this is High Fantasy Writing, and happy writing! I should probably get back to my writing that I'm doing right now. Working on rewrites, it's a process.